Hello and welcome to 1624. This week we're looking at computing in education, more specifically the movement from ICT to computing in schools, what were the reasons for the change, how schools and teachers have reacted, the number of students taking the programme, private companies' role in this area of education, and the transition from schools to university beyond to employment. If you have listened to 1624 before, you'll notice this episode's a little bit different, just in regard that this is one interview rather than having all three in one episode. There'll still be three experts we'll be talking to, but their interviews will be staggered and come out during the week. Later in the week, we'll be hearing from Mark Chambers, the ex-CEO of NACE, and Craig Herring from the Tech Foundation. But today we'll be hearing from Bill Mitchell, who's director of the BCS Academy for Computing. The BCS, or the British Computing Society, is the chartered institute for IT in this country. Bill was a member of the Royal Society's advisory group for the study into computing education in school, published in January 2012, and more recently he was invited by the DofE to act as the BCS executive responsible for coordinating the development of the statutory computing curriculum for schools. Before the BCS, Bill spent over 20 years researching the mathematical foundations of computer science and software engineering in both industry and academia. During that time, he's been a researcher Motorola's European Software Research Labs and the universities of Manchester, Surrey and Southampton. So let's hear from Bill. So in September 2014, ICT was moved to computing. Can you just talk to me a bit about the thinking behind that move and why it happened?
Well, the old ICT curriculum was a great curriculum for the 90s. It was introduced at a time when not many people owned a computer, and using a computer was seen as something radical and amazing and really important that all of our children learned how to do that, and that was absolutely right. And it was focused very much on the things that at the time were seen to be cutting edge, really exciting, future-proof skills around using a word processor or a spreadsheet or being able to put forward a presentation. And those were things at the time that were genuinely believed to be really important, and they were things that people needed to learn how to do and still do. But what didn't happen since the 90s was people didn't start realising that computers had become ubiquitous. Those skills were no longer things that children were learning at secondary school. They were actually learning them at primary school. And because of that, we ended up with a system where qualifications were not equipping people with the skills they needed in life. We had a curriculum that was very out of date. We also had, by accident, come up with a curriculum that was very much focused on very specific technologies. Whereas to my mind and most educators' minds, when you go to school, you go to learn thinking skills, skills that are going to be really useful for your entire life, and skills that are based on understanding concepts and principles and getting familiar with an entire body of knowledge. So it was very strange that we had this odd curriculum that was very much focused on particular technologies. And as I say, children were doing those already at primary school. So then they got to secondary school and they were doing them all over again. So long before the announcement came in 2013, there'd been a number of other things going on. So, for example, Ofsted had been looking at the state of ICT education and published a couple of reports saying this is not right. It's not being done well, it's producing the wrong things, children aren't learning the right things. So all of that was already being done by government. There was a report from Alison Wolfe, and it was focusing on vocational education, but it touched on what was going on around ICT and pointed out that an awful lot of what people were learning, well, actually wasn't going to help them at all in getting a job. So that wasn't particularly good either. And then ourselves, with the Computing at School group, which in those days only consisted of a handful of people, unlike today when it's about 28,500 people, we'd been lobbying as best as we could to the Department for Education and government, saying, although ICT does teach some really useful things, it is missing computer science. And in the 21st century, this is really important for the nation, and it's really important for children, and it's really important for every single child. This isn't something that's just about producing more computer scientists. which we do need. It's about making sure every human being has those thinking skills that mean they're going to be able to thrive in what was already a very digital age and has become a heck of a lot more digital since.
Yeah, exactly. And it's about this, or from what I've seen, about this idea of how to use computers as a whole rather than being able to run a program. And so what were the ideas put forward to the Department of Education by yourself and the Royal Society's advisory group?
So maybe rather than going into the very, very detailed stuff about what we put forward, I mean, the kind of big picture was that everybody should have those computational thinking skills. So what does that mean? Well, very, very roughly, and I do mean roughly, I'm not going to give you kind of a precise technical definition. Roughly, it means you can be given a real world problem and you can turn it into something that can be represented computationally. Once you've got to that, so that's kind of stage one. Stage two is you then have the thinking skills to be able to investigate and explore that representation to try and understand what are the causes of the problem, what possible solutions there might be. And then step three is you can take those ideas that have come up from your investigation of the computational model and turn them into a precise and accurate algorithm that tells you what the solution is. And then the final step is you can convert that into a computer program. Now, interestingly, the bit that everybody focuses on is the last bit, which they always go, we have a coding curriculum. No, we don't. We have a computing curriculum. Coding is to computing, a bit like what algebra is to maths. You know, maths is not algebra. Maths is all sorts of interesting things, and the algebra is just a particular notation that you use to describe ideas in maths and relate them to one another, which is kind of like what the programming is in computing. It's a way of describing what you've done in a form the computer's going to go out and execute. But it's not the important bit. The really important bit is the thinking part. There's a mantra that lots of people in computer science have, which is think before you code. And it's the thinking bit which is the most important part.
Were there many changes made by the DofE between that November 2012 and September 2013 when it was released?
So the way we went about putting it together in the first place is we were working with the Royal Academy of Engineering, and we brought in people from industry, people from universities, people from all sorts of organisations that were interested in this, as well as school teachers. And the thing I found very interesting in when we started trying to put this together is initially we were rather of the view this was very much about introducing computer science into secondary schools. And what we were very surprised at when we went out and talked to primary schools is they said, why aren't we doing this too? Because you know what, we are already doing some of this, and we're already teaching our children about ideas that are related to computer science, and we could really do this well. So we then started doing consultations with primary schools, and what we were staggered by, being old people that were rather out of touch with our youngsters, we were surprised to discover that, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds got it. They actually could understand computing concepts. They enjoyed learning about this stuff, and they were good at it. So suddenly our mindset changed from, this is very much a secondary school thing, to going, what are we talking about? Our primary school children would really benefit from this, and they can do it. Well, right, so we need to shift this down into primary schools and start there. That was our biggest change in terms of how we developed things. From the DFE's point of view, when they saw our initial draft, they were positive about it and they liked it. But one of the things they felt was that it needed a stronger computer science element, which interested us a lot because we've been trying hard not to be too radical in the way we'd suggested computer science should be introduced, but we were very encouraged by the fact the DFE felt we should embrace computer science and make sure it really was at the heart of the curriculum. So we went back and we revised it, did more consultations, and we ended up with a stronger curriculum as a result of that.
The schools were given, if I'm right, 12 months to prepare from September 2013. How did schools deal with this adjustment period, did you feel? And were the resources made available? Because I saw that 4.5 million was given over 3 years to 2016. Last year, maths was given 41 million, if I'm right, over 4 years. So not quite 10 times the amount, but in that kind of region. So I'd just be interested to hear about what you thought about schools' ability to carry this out.
So at the time, the DFE's view, and I think that's pretty much the same as it is at the moment, that what they should do. So this was when a new government had come in, okay? So in 2010, we had the coalition government, as it was. Their view around education was very much that the role of the Department for Education was to set the direction of travel, was to provide leadership, but it should not interfere, as they saw it, in the way teachers chose to teach a subject. So for them, what was really important was they defined what a subject was, as a school subject, whether that be French or computer science, but how it was taught and the resources that schools used to teach it, they didn't feel they should be telling schools what to do. So at the time, the coalition government felt that what had happened in the past was that governments over the eons, not just the previous government, governments of all flavours, had become excessively prescriptive about how they told teachers what to do, when to do it, how to do it. So their view was, no, we won't do that. We will give you the definition of this subject and leave you to figure out what to do with it. And the assumption was that other organisations such as BCS, Computing at School, people like Raspberry Pi, people like STEM Learning, all these other organisations would come along and would be there for schools to turn to get help and support. What we've found since is that there are a certain percentage of schools that have been very happy to turn outwards to other organisations to get help, and there are other schools that haven't turned to organisations for help. And we did an analysis of the GCSE results for the last couple of years, where you've got some really meaningful data now, and it's very, very clear that the schools that have had support and help are attracting more students to GCSE computer science, and they're getting higher results than the schools that are not getting help. So that leaves you with a very interesting picture of very variable quality of education in computing across the country. And from the data, what you can tell is it's very much down to whether schools are being supported or not being supported.
I think there were 44 bullet points in the old ICT curriculum, and obviously computing has a wider breadth of topic area, and it got pushed down to 22 bullet points, if I'm right. So that kind of shows as an example of how teachers were given less strict guidance into how they should be teaching a subject.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, our brief was you've got to be able to fit the secondary school programme of study onto 2 pages of A4 was our brief, and the same story for primary schools. And when we were given that brief, our initial thought was, wow. But when we sat down and actually did it, it was amazing how that, as a really rigorous exercise in condensing what genuinely matters as opposed to nice to have, meant that we absolutely focused on the very, very core principles and concepts that were needed, rather than all kinds of other things that may or may not actually matter that much. Where I think teachers felt very uncomfortable initially, and that we had a lot of people feeling unhappy at the start, suddenly overnight they went from huge document telling you what to do to short document saying, you're the professional, you choose how to teach this. And it took the best part of the first year, I think, for schools to realise, oh, actually, we now need to go and find other organisations that are going to fill the gap that the DFE have decided they don't want to be in anymore.
Yeah, sure, because this is quite important, isn't it? On also with the movement from ICT to computing, it takes a different level of knowledge from the teacher. And if the Department of Education are saying that it's up to the school to sort it out, and obviously for somebody that's trained or skilled enough in computing, because of the lack of supply of them, I guess, there would be comparatively low wages in schools. So it's quite hard to pull people into schools in this profession.
Yeah. So the big issue is not so much the curriculum, because what is interesting is that when it was first introduced, it was a big shock for people. Whereas now, when there have been so many surveys done over the last few years about what teachers feel about the new computing curriculum, the overwhelming majority of teachers really like the curriculum. Now they've got familiar with it and have started to figure out what we can do with it. The biggest concern teachers have now when you go around and talk to them is that they don't feel they have the depth of subject knowledge expertise to be able to absolutely teach computer science at GCSE to the ability that they want to be able to teach it to. So I think the single biggest need at the moment, as far as secondary schools are concerned, is making sure that we do provide a very large number of teachers with the subject knowledge expertise they really, really should have, so they can feel absolutely confident that they can do computer science at GCSE.
And so to combat this, the Master Teacher Programme was brought in. Can you just explain a little bit about what that is?
So in our view, the best way of helping teachers is to get them talking to other teachers. Our work since 2010 has been about developing and building a community of practice for computing teachers. We absolutely believe that the way teachers develop best as a professional is when they are sitting face to face with a bunch of other computing teachers. They're sharing ideas, they're developing new ways of teaching, they're reflecting on their own teaching practice, they're getting other teachers to help evaluate the way things have actually been going in the classroom. So for us, that is the key to raising standards in computing education. Okay, well, if that's what you want to do, you do need a core of expert teachers in computing and a core of teachers who are prepared to go around and help other teachers to get going, to host meetings, to help them look at what they've been teaching, to provide them with that kind of reflective experience and evaluation. And these are the master teachers. So they are people who are passionate about the subject, they're good at teaching this stuff, and they want to help their colleagues in other schools. And what the DfE decided they were prepared to do was to fund a national programme where we could recruit a certain number of teachers, provide them with some initial training, which would help them to share their knowledge and support colleagues in other schools, and then put together a national network where we could broker meetings going on around the country, get universities involved, get employers involved, so that teachers could go to face-to-face meetings with other teachers and start to improve what they were doing in the classroom.
And this has been a success in your eyes, where it's worked well, the Master Teacher Programme.
Well, what we do now, because I was saying earlier on, we've got the data, and one of the things we've been looking at very hard is what happens around GCSE computer science to schools that have been supported through the network. So these master teachers work inside of a thing we call the Network of Excellence. That's what the Department for Education funds, is this network. What we've discovered when we've looked at the data over the last 2 years is that the most common GCSE computer science grade that children achieve in schools which are part of this Network of Excellence is a grade B. And if you look at schools which have not been reached by the network, the most common grade which is achieved at GCSE computer science is grade C. So there's a whole grade difference between the schools that we reach through the network and schools that aren't reached. So I'm feeling pretty positive that we have very robust data that shows that work has significantly improved educational standards where it's able to get into schools.
And because you said that there was, because obviously it's left up to the schools to implement and to train to the teachers to the level, is the Master Teach Programme affecting the majority of schools, the vast majority of schools, or is it not being able to?
Well, the scale of the resourcing for it means that the best it could possibly do is reach about 20% of schools. It works in primary and secondary. And we have reached 20% of schools. We've done that because we've been able to work with companies like Microsoft and Google and BT and the BBC and various other folks. So we've been able to build on the core funding we've had from DfE, and that's been fantastic. The truth, though, is that the funding was only ever going to allow us to reach 20% of schools. So the other 80% of schools would have had to have found support in some other way if they chose to do so. I mean, I think there's definitely a strong case for saying, given that there is now strong data showing that this kind of support has been effective, that it's worthwhile looking at how that sort of support could be scaled up for other schools, because clearly it's helping schools. They are getting better results and more people attracted into the subject.
I'm just going to read out some of these stats. For GCSE, 64,159 people took GCSE and 7,600 took A-level. You guys say that this number for GCSE should be around 200,000, so over triple, and 40,000 for A-level, which is well over 4 times, maybe 5 times the amount of people are taking it. Why are these figures so low compared to what is needed?
Depends how you want to look at these numbers. So, in terms of the needs of what the country wants, we should be getting these 200,000 students. At the same time, let's remember that we are only 3 years into a very brand new curriculum. So, from that point of view, having gone from nobody doing this subject to now getting, not far off 70,000 children doing it at GCSE level, that's actually a success story. However, it's not good enough. Why is it that we are at this level? Well, schools have been doing really good things to introduce it. Where schools get support, they're getting more students attracted to it. And that seems to be the key. Where schools are not getting support, they aren't attracting as many students. Why might that be? Well, suppose you're a teacher who's been told to teach this subject and you don't really know much about it. You're not going to feel terribly confident. You're not necessarily going to do a great sales job to prospective students that might be thinking about doing the subject or not, perhaps. And let's not forget, computer science is an option. It's competing with all the other subjects at GCSE level for students to be attracted to. So you need a teacher who's confident, who's enthusiastic, and who can inspire children to do this subject. So that's one thing. You need confident teachers. I think the other thing is, at the moment, the current GCSE specification, unless you are quite a skilled teacher, that specification looks quite dry, very, very technical, which isn't necessarily going to appeal to a very broad range of students. And again, that's coming back to needing teachers who are confident and enthusiastic, who can explain to students what's really behind that apparently looking dry and technical specification that's coming out of the GCSE exam boards. So that's a problem. The other problem is very, very many schools simply are nervous about pushing a high-stakes GCSE qualification that might adversely affect their league table positions if they're not terribly sure whether they're going to be able to make a real success of it or not.
Do you think, because obviously it's been a massive change in the knowledge needed for teachers and schools to take on computing and run with it, and there's been 4.5 million funding over 3 years, which you've said the Master Teach programme could only reach about 20% of schools, and obviously with the help of the BCS and other companies, which are still fairly small in comparison to the number of schools. And obviously we can't really afford, with what's going on in the outside world, for this to be a 15-year programme. Do you think there's been the support needed from the DofE to really take on this change and make it a success?
I think the scale of the funding was less than the challenge that was really being faced the country. I think in terms of getting to all of the schools in the country, it was very clear that the scale of the funding was aimed at being able to reach 20% of schools. With hindsight, you can say we should have realised that it needed to be aimed at a lot more schools. And I think progress definitely needs to be accelerated. So if you think in the 21st century, Britain is now going to be making its way in the world, not as connected to Europe as it used to be. It needs a very strong talent pipeline. This is the digital age we are in the middle of. We need to make sure we have people with those digital skills. If you're a citizen in this modern world, you need to be savvy as a digital citizen. Most of your life now exists in a digital world. So it's absolutely fundamental from your point of view as an individual and from the country's point of view economically that we make sure everybody gets a good computing education. So working that backwards, you can definitely say there needs to be a far bigger investment in making sure computing is guaranteed to be a success in all schools, as well as the 20% that so far have had support and help, which has clearly made a difference.
And can we just move on slightly to school and universities? Because Sheila Flavel from the FDM Group said there's a serious mismatch of what is taught in schools and universities and what businesses require. Do you think this is an accurate representation of what's happening? And can you just expand a bit upon that?
She's right and wrong both at the same time. And we've been consulting with employers just a few months ago because we accredit the computer science degrees in 100 universities around the UK. So we know quite a bit about this area. And from consulting with employers, what's clear is there are very different views from different employers. So some employers are saying we actually need far more hardcore computer science graduates. Then there's a different set of employers who are saying, I don't actually need hardcore computer science graduates. I need people who are really good at working in teams, really good at understanding how to apply technology, and really good at integrating it into the business to create new business value. And then you have other employers who are saying, we need both of those and other people as well. I think a good example is BT. BT employ some really hardcore computer science people in their research centre. They also employ lots of people who you'll see in the vans working outside the green box in the street who are rewiring all the phone lines because something's gone wrong. They have a lot of people in marketing, a lot of people in sales. They have people at all sorts of different levels, all of whom need different digital skills in order to do their job. And when you put all the different bits together from all the different employers, what seems to be coming out of it is that at every level of digital skills in industry, we need more people with better digital skills. Now, we have lots of universities doing lots of different degree types. Some of those degrees are aimed at producing graduates who have a phenomenal combination of business skills with some really good technical computing element to it, whereas other computing degree courses provide people who are really hardcore computer engineers, but they don't have much in the way of a business knowledge base from that degree course. So that is, I think, a lot of why employers have a problem with the computing graduates they get, because they come out with all sorts of different mixes of skills, but it's not entirely obvious to the employer which mix of skills they're going to get just by looking at the title at the university of that particular degree course.
I saw also that there's a stat of that 13% of computer science students are unemployed 6 months after graduating, which is higher than across the average of subjects, which is 8%. Why, obviously, if there's such a huge demand for people with computer skills, why are employers not scrabbling over them?
So the problem with that headline statistic is it covers a much more complicated situation. So I personally used to be a lecturer at the University of Surrey. They have a huge industrial placement programme as part of their degree course, and as a result of that, way above 95% of their students are employed because they come out of the degree course with a huge range of professional skills they developed on placement that go with the degree course that they did at the same time. So they are snapped up by industry. Other examples, for example, the University of Manchester, they have huge proportion, way over 95% of their students going to jobs. So the difference across the university sector of how many students get employed and don't is very, very mixed. Some of the problems that have been around computer science is that departments have been very, very good at bringing in people from poorer areas, from different ethnic mixes, and the data shows that those are the sectors of society that find it harder to get jobs. So whilst computing departments have been very, very good in terms of their social inclusivity and diversity in terms of recruitment of students, that then causes some of them a problem later on, because those are exactly the students that then find it harder to actually get jobs when they're going out and being interviewed. Now, I think one way of fixing this is if we join up better the school system with the university system. If we can get 40,000 people going through computing A level, we can transform the curricula that's taught at universities so that they start on day one at university with a depth of knowledge which at the moment they don't have in computing, because most students who start on a computing degree haven't done A level. Sorry, I just realised my mobile phone was trying to ring. So if we can change the secondary school system and the primary school system, so there's a huge pipeline of people coming through secondary schools with that subject knowledge already when they start universities can A, start them at a much deeper level in terms of subject content, and B, they can enrich what they're teaching those students with much more elements of professional skills because they've got room in the curriculum to do those sorts of things. So I think in the long term, that's the kind of solution to make sure that everybody going to university that does a computing degree comes out with the kind of professional skills and knowledge and understanding that's going to be appealing to lots of employers.
There was one other thing that I wanted to ask. We talked about it briefly earlier about Microsoft, Google, and these other companies investing in education. How do their programs compare?
So for me, the main difference in how they compare is the kind of workforce those companies have. So BT, they've been fantastic at supporting the Barefoot Computing Project, which goes into primary schools. And the reason they've been so fantastic, well, one, they care about the subject, so it really matters even at CEO level. But two, they have 90,000 people across the UK. So they have boots on the ground across the whole country who can go into primary schools and give them face-to-face support and help, which has been phenomenally fantastic and made a huge difference to those schools where it's happened. So BT have now been able to, I think it was well over 45,000 primary school teachers over the last few years, which is fantastic. But that's because they've got people across the whole country. If you take, say, Google, awesome company, does brilliant things, but in terms of the number of people they employ in the UK, it's actually not very many. So you can't expect Google to start sending their people around schools in the UK because they haven't got them. But what Google have are very, very bright, clever people who can help produce resources for schools, and they've got some money too, so they can actually fund things. So some of the stuff we've done with Google, they've supported projects such as what we call Quantum. Quantum is a project which provides assessment tests to schools, incredibly useful thing to do, but it doesn't require lots and lots of people going around in schools and actually introducing that face to face, unlike the BT project. So the way different companies support what goes on depends very much on their profile within the UK and what they can contribute.
But because there's like Tata Consultancy of their IT Futures program, which has 200,000 kids in 600 schools, is there a bit of a worry with 100 different companies getting involved? What are some of the problems that are caused by this?
For me, the issue around lots of companies wanting to do stuff, which is brilliant. I love it. I think it's really, really fantastic. But the tricky part is making sure they're not all reinventing the same wheel and that they're all coming together so that the whole is way bigger than the sum of the parts. And that's the biggest challenge for me. It's about coordinating across all of those different industry groups so that they are genuinely, collectively doing something that makes a difference on the national scale. And that is a challenge. And that's something that we're working at all the time. And it's something that companies themselves also realise, that they want to be part of a bigger whole. They don't want to be just doing their own little niche thing just to make themselves look good. They do genuinely want to be part of the bigger movement. But of course, the challenge is how you do that, because all of those companies also, quite rightly, want recognition for what they do. And they want to be able to say to their shareholders, their workforce, their customers, look what we've done. This is really positive. We're helping. Whilst at the same time, they do also want to be able to partner with other companies and do something bigger. And that is a challenge. That is not easy. And it's something that we work at all the time with different companies like Google, Microsoft and BT and BBC and various others.
Great. I think we're going to leave it there. But can you just give us a couple of things to take away from this?
The curriculum is not about coding, even though coding is extremely important and actually you can have so much fun doing coding. It's about the computational thinking part. And you, Mr. Ordinary Citizen or Mrs. Ordinary Citizen or Miss Ordinary Citizen, you jolly well need to make sure that you are developing those computational thinking skills in this digital world. So you need to go and make sure you can go do it. That would be one thing. I think the other thing that everybody needs to realise is that this subject hugely matters for the well-being of our nation, and we need to make sure it's working in all our schools for all our children and the future of this country. So we better get focused on that.
Great. And is there anything that you've read, listened to or watched that you would recommend people tune into?
Well, on the 10th of November 2017, the Royal Society will be publishing their report onto the state of computing education in the UK. Download it, read it. It'll be a very worthwhile read, I think.
And for Bill's Charity Nation, I'm still waiting on his email, but I'll chase him up on Monday. And by Wednesday, when the Craig Hurring interview comes out, I'll include it in that. So I hope you enjoyed that podcast from Bill on the movement from ICT to computing, where it is now and where we're moving forwards. I'd definitely check out Craig Hurring and Mark Chambers later in the week, especially Mark, only in the respect just because he's got some very different of ideas about where we are in computing, especially to do with private companies and the support that's being given. So that's definitely worth checking out. Also, at the end of Mark's interview, we have a response from Bill, because they both have, as mentioned, quite different views on this. So it was really great from Bill to talk about some of the concerns that Mark raised. But bye for now, and thanks for listening. And as always, check out the Facebook page and the Instagram and Twitter pages, because there'll be loads more information on computing throughout the week.